And let's shift focus now to the turmoil in the East African nation of Tanzania, where protests erupted against President Samia Suluhu Hassan on voting day. Now, as the vote count is underway, police have imposed an evening curfew in the country's biggest city.
On October 4th, 2025, a military officer called John Charles Tesha in Tanzania went live on camera and made some startling declarations. He said, "Your country is stealing from you, and if we don't stop them, this nation will collapse." And then he called on the military to overthrow the government, something that has never happened for the past 60 years in Tanzania. Within a few hours, the video went viral on social media despite the government's efforts to bring it down. Guess what happened next? 2 days later, he was discharged. Until date, his whereabouts remain unknown. What happened to this decorated military officer? The answer can be traced to President Samia Hassan, Tanzania's first female president. When Samia stepped into office in March 2021, everyone saw a beacon of hope. A leader who promised to fix a divided country by reversing the iron-fisted rule of the guy before her. They called her Mama Samia, the mother of the nation. But now, as Tanzania faces a new crisis, that picture is being replaced by something way more complex and feared. The reformer is now being accused of using the exact same tactics she promised to get rid of. So how did the woman who promised a democratic new start become Africa's most feared female president? This is a story about a leader caught between doing good and holding on to power, between reform and repression. It's a story that shows you just how complicated leadership in Africa can be, and why the line between a savior and a strongman is often dangerously thin. Okay, to get the Samia Suluhu of today, you have to remember the Tanzania she walked into. The president before her, John Magufuli, was nicknamed the bulldozer. He got the name for building a lot of stuff, but pretty soon it described his whole presidency. Under Magufuli, any democratic space Tanzania had was just crushed. No political rallies, opposition leaders arrested, newspapers shut down. A culture of fear took over. He was a populist who ruled with an iron fist and famously told everyone COVID-19 wasn't a big deal. His sudden death in March 2021 was a huge shock. And into that chaos stepped his vice president, Samia Suluhu Hassan, a calm, quiet person from Zanzibar, the complete opposite of the loud and aggressive Magufuli. For a lot of people, she was a breath of fresh air, and she was the country's first female president, a massive deal for the continent. At first, it looked like the hope was real. She immediately started undoing Magufuli's worst policies. She admitted COVID-19 was a threat, started a vaccination program, and began fixing relationships with other countries that Magufuli had ruined. The biggest thing, she came up with this 4 R's agenda: reconciliation, resilience, reforms, and rebuilding. And it wasn't just talk. In a move that shocked everyone, she ordered the release of political prisoners that Magufuli had locked up. She sat down and met with opposition leaders, including Tundu Lissu, a guy who hated the ruling party and had barely survived an assassination attempt back in 2017. In January 2023, she did something huge. She lifted the 6-year ban on political rallies. That ban was Magufuli's signature move of repression. She let newspapers that had been shut down start printing again. It really felt like a new democratic dawn was breaking over Tanzania. Mama Samia seemed to be living up to her name, acting like a mother trying to bring her broken family back together. And she wasn't just focused on politics. She went hard on an economic agenda to rebrand Tanzania as the place to invest. Magufuli was unpredictable and protectionist. Samia was all about being open for business. She pushed for huge projects, like a new railway and a massive hydropower dam, trying to make Tanzania the economic king of East Africa. And you could see the results. Between 2021 and 2023, Tanzania's GDP surged, climbing by over $15 billion. Foreign money poured in. Big international banks like the World Bank and the IMF, who were scared of Magufuli, were now praising her. She was getting awards on the global stage. Time magazine named her one of the 100 most influential people, and everyone was celebrating her as the face of modern African leadership. She was building two identities at once, a political healer at home and a sharp economic deal-maker abroad. This mix of peace and progress gave her a ton of support. She seemed both compassionate and effective, a leader who could bring stability and growth without all the brutal force of the last guy. For a while, it looked like the perfect strategy. She was building her power, not by force, but by bringing people in and growing the economy. She was showing that you could be strong without being a tyrant. And this balancing act is what started to build her reputation. People respected her for the reforms, but the political old guard started getting nervous. They saw a leader who was cleverly pushing aside her rivals in the party, the Magufuli loyalists, and building a new power base completely around herself. This wasn't the fear you have of a brutal dictator. It was a different kind of fear, the fear of facing a super smart, strategic political player. She was taking apart the old system not with a bulldozer, but with a surgeon's knife. She was proving to be way more politically skilled than anyone ever thought. And as her power grew, a new, more disturbing question started to come up. What happens when this new power gets challenged? Now, what most people don't understand is that in most cases, when a president steps into power, especially from the party of the former predecessor, that president is expected to follow the principles of the party. So President Samia didn't just inherit the presidency in March 2021, she also inherited the system. The president's party, Chama cha Mapinduzi Party, has governed the country since it gained independence in 1961. That's a solid 48 years, and it means that every president Tanzania has ever had has been from this party. Even in the parliament, the CCM manages to dominate. What this means is that over the years, this party has not just grown powerful, it also has a system which it follows to make it powerful. The CCM was formed back in 1961 when the mainland and Zanzibar's ruling party merged. Their goal was to unite Tanzania under one vision, the vision of Julius Nyerere, Tanzania's first president. Julius believed in African socialism, self-reliance, and dignity. But as history has shown us, when people stay too long in power, they tend to forget their vision. They tend to want to cling to power at all costs, including the use of suppression. This is what happened to the CCM after staying in power for more than 50 years. This is the system that President Samia inherited, one filled with politicians both past and present, retired generals and businessmen who are content with the system. Clearly, these people would not want the system which they have benefited so long to be dismantled. CCM will not want to leave the seat of power. And given how the former predecessors held on to power, it was quite clear what President Samia had to do to also stay in power. So, as President Samia consolidated her power and got ready for her first real election in 2025, the vibe in Tanzania started to change. That era of reconciliation, turns out, it had an expiration date. The new crisis wasn't one single event, but a slow, creepy return to the old ways, and the coming election just sped everything up. The first signs were small, then they became impossible to ignore. The constitutional review, a huge demand from the opposition and something she had promised, was suddenly pushed until after the 2025 elections. For critics, this was a massive red flag. It looked like the president wasn't willing to make any changes that could weaken her party's grip on power before she secured her own win. The promise of a new, fairer system was put on hold, and a lot of people worried it was never coming. Then came the laws. New election laws were passed in early 2024, but the opposition said they did nothing to create a truly independent election or stop political meddling. A major issue was the law that says presidential election results can't be challenged in court, something human rights courts have said is wrong, but it's still the law in Tanzania. The message was loud and clear. Reforms will only go so far. They won't be allowed to threaten the ruling Chama cha Mapinduzi Party's power. As 2024 went on, things got darker, fast. The political space that everyone celebrated for opening up started shrinking again. The turning point was a wave of repression that started building before the elections. But this wasn't the messy, random brutality of Magufuli. This was different. It was targeted, systematic, and meant to send a cold message to anyone who thought about seriously challenging the president. The main target was the biggest opposition party, Chadema, and its loudmouthed leader, Tundu Lissu. Lissu, who had come back to Tanzania from exile to be part of the new political scene, became its first and biggest victim. In April 2025, he was arrested and charged with treason, a non-bailable offense that could mean the death penalty. The charges were based on things he said online calling for fair elections. The arrest of a main presidential candidate on charges that serious sent a shockwave through the country. The reformer who once met with Lissu to talk peace was now sending him to prison. That was just the start. A full-on crackdown on the opposition followed. In the months before the October 2025 election, reports of arrests, kidnappings, and intimidation became normal. On April 24, 2025, police arrested dozens of Chadema supporters who were just standing outside the courthouse where Lissu was. Reports said many were beaten and then just abandoned in forests miles outside the city. Luhaga Mpina, the presidential candidate for another opposition party, ACT Wazalendo, was kicked out of the race by the Electoral Commission for what his party called bogus reasons. With Lissu in jail and Mpina blocked from running, President Samia's path to victory was now almost completely clear of any real competition. The government's machinery was being turned into a weapon. The state's communication authority was accused of censoring anyone who disagreed online, telling independent news sites to delete articles about sensitive things like kidnappings. The internet, which was supposed to be a new place for free speech, became a war zone between pro-government accounts and anonymous critics who were scared of what would happen to them in the real world. Amnesty International put out a brutal report in October 2025, right before the election, called Unopposed, Unchecked, Unjust. It detailed a serious campaign of repression designed to create a climate of fear. The report talked about forced disappearances, torture, and peaceful protests being violently broken up. Between 2015 and February 2025, the Legal and Human Rights Center had already counted around 100 cases of abductions and forced disappearances. It only got worse as the election got closer. This is the turning point where respect started to turn into fear. The hope that Mama Samia was a totally different kind of leader started to die. And what replaced it was the terrifying thought that she was maybe just a more polished, more strategic, and ultimately more effective authoritarian than the last guy. Magufuli's repression was clumsy and obvious. This new repression was cold and calculated. It used the state's own institutions, the courts, the police, the regulators, to systematically take apart the opposition while pretending everything was legal. And here's the crazy part. While all this was happening, President Samia was still projecting this image of a stateswoman focused on development. As opposition leaders were being arrested, you'd see her on TV opening a new bridge or speaking at a global conference about economic growth. It created this bizarre, disturbing split-screen reality for Tanzanians. On one screen, the promise of a better economy. On the other, the brutal reality of political repression. This double act is the real reason she is so feared. She has shown she can do both, enlightened reform and ruthless crackdown, and that she's willing to switch between the two depending on what it takes to stay in power. The 2025 election was the grim finale of this downward spiral. With her main rivals either in jail or disqualified, observers didn't call it an election, they called it a coronation. Violent protests broke out in the capital on election day, but they were met with huge numbers of security forces and an internet shutdown across the country. The same government that promised openness was now using digital blackouts to control what people could see and say. What happened after the election cemented President Samia's transformation. She had won her first elected term, but she sacrificed the democratic ideals she once talked about to get it. This is where the image of Mama Samia, the caring mother of the nation, was completely replaced by something much more intimidating. The fear she inspires now isn't just about clever political moves. It's about the brutal reality of what happens to people who get in her way. Human Rights Watch and Amnesty International have documented a horrifying pattern. Since mid-2024, they say dozens of opposition members, activists, and journalists have been harassed, attacked, kidnapped, or tortured. Chadema party officials like Dionys Kipanya and Deusdedith Soka vanished, and as of late 2025, no one knows where they are. Another activist, Maduda Niagali, was taken from his home in May 2025, And even after a court case was filed, he hasn't been seen since. Maybe the most chilling part is that the crackdown has even started to target people from inside the ruling CCM party itself, a line even Magufuli almost never crossed. Humphrey Polepole, a former top official and CCM loyalist who had started to criticize the government, was grabbed from his home in October 2025 and disappeared. This sent a message to everyone. No one is safe. You will be loyal, and if you speak out from any side, you will be crushed. This is the Iron Fist. It's a calculated, ruthless plan to lock down power that mixes legal attacks with pure brute force. Tundu Lissu, her biggest rival, is facing treason charges for a speech he gave, a clear use of the law as a weapon to get rid of a political threat. At the same time, other critics just disappeared, a tactic meant to create terror and uncertainty. According to the Tanganyika Law Society, by August 2024, there were 83 open cases of people who had gone missing under mysterious circumstances. Amnesty International has reported on the extrajudicial killings of opposition figures. This ruthless efficiency is what makes her different from other authoritarians. She has combined Magufuli's total disregard for human rights with a new level of smart strategy and international polish. She still gets welcomed in Western capitals and praised for her economic policies, even while her government is accused of state-sponsored brutality back home. She has mastered the art of talking about reform while walking the walk of repression. This duality is her signature move. She'll announce billions in new funding from the World Bank one week, and the next week, her security forces are accused of kidnapping an activist. She'll give a speech about women's empowerment on a global stage while her government is accused of going after female opposition leaders like Janeth Ryth, who was arrested for criticizing the government's economic policies. This blend of progress and persecution, of economic growth and democratic collapse, makes her an incredibly complex and intimidating figure. Her opponents fear her because they know their options are to stay silent, go to prison, or worse. Other leaders on the continent respect her, and maybe fear her too, because they're watching a masterclass in how to lock down power. She's managed to do what many authoritarians struggle with: keep international credibility and economic growth going while wiping out all political threats at home. She has shown she will do whatever it takes to secure her power. She has shown that the first part of her presidency, the reconciliation part, wasn't a change of heart. It was a change of tactics. It was a strategic move to calm things down, get rid of her predecessor's loyalists, and build her own power base before showing her true iron-willed nature. That nickname, Mama Samia, now has a dark, ironic ring to it. Her critics don't use it as a term of affection anymore. They use it sarcastically, as a reminder of the hope she first represented, a hope that is now completely destroyed. The mother who was supposed to heal the nation is now in charge of a new generation of political orphans, whose fathers, brothers, and sons have disappeared or been jailed for demanding the very democracy she once promised them. So we come back to the big question: how did the woman who promised reform become Africa's most feared female president? The story of Samia Suluhu Hassan is a warning about what power does to people. She came to power on a massive wave of hope, representing a new direction for Tanzania and a symbol for the whole continent. She got rid of her predecessor's worst policies, freed political prisoners, reopened the media, and promised a government of reconciliation and reform. But as the 2025 election got closer, a different leader came out. The reformer gave way to the ruler. The promise of an open democracy was sacrificed to ensure political survival. Her administration has systematically taken apart the opposition, using the courts as a weapon, the security forces as a tool of fear, and the language of reform as a shield to block international criticism. She is feared not because she is a simple tyrant, but because she is a much more complex and effective one. She pairs a successful economic agenda with ruthless political repression. She is the darling of international investors and the terror of local activists at the same time. This duality makes her uniquely powerful and uniquely dangerous. She has created a model of authoritarianism that is polished, strategic, and terrifyingly effective. It's a model where giant infrastructure projects and economic growth are used to justify a regime that silences, imprisons, and disappears its critics. The tragedy of Samia Suluhu Hassan is the betrayal of that initial hope. The hope that a leader could be both strong and democratic, powerful and compassionate. Her presidency has shown that, for now, in Tanzania, you might not be able to be both. The country is more stable in some ways, and the economy is growing, but its democratic soul is being carved out from the inside. So what do you think? Is Samia Suluhu Hassan a pragmatic leader doing what it takes to keep a country stable and growing in a tough neighborhood? Or is she the polished face of a new, smarter brand of authoritarianism? Is she a reformer who lost her way, or was this the plan all along? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want to understand the forces shaping our world, make sure you're subscribed. Thank you for watching.